Hello, today I'm going to show you how to use a Padlet when you are working with your alternately assessed students and you're addressing the ELA Essential Element W3.1, which is writing opinions about a text, or when you're working on the Essential Element W3.2, which is writing to share information supported by details. So I'm going to show you how I incorporate this activity. It's called a Padlet, and I'm going to show you the ways that I would do it. And so I'm going to go through some things I would work on with my students prior to embedding something like this, which is like a discussion board, which many of you might be familiar with if you've taken PDs at the DOE and utilized Padlets on your own, but maybe didn't think of how you can utilize it with your students. And so I'm going to go through, show you how I would pre-teach some things for my students to practice with them, and then how I would incorporate and try to teach them to use a Padlet, which is like a discussion board, and thinking of it in a way as a blackboard in your virtual classroom that you can have your students respond and provide that for everyone else to see. So I first started off with identifying some good and poor choices, right? Something that my students had read recently was what if everyone would do that, right? What if everybody did that? So, going over good choices, poor choices that the characters made. Often when we're going through folk tales, we talk about the problem, how the characters felt about the problem. So we want to start talking about those good and poor choices that characters have made throughout various stories. So one way that I like to do this is I like to tie in my students identifying some good and poor choices that they make themselves, right? So I tie it into what is happening with my students so they can kind of put themselves in the character's shoes and start to understand that characters might have feelings very similar to them. So I went through and I found just some examples of good and poor choices that might happen at school. You can definitely modify this and have it, up to date for your virtual classroom. You may not obviously want to have walking in a straight line, but maybe you would have something like turning your work in on time, right? Or maybe you would have something like helping someone, right? Something like that, right? Whatever would work for your classroom, something that's appropriate and would fit to whatever needs, your students have. We can even find icons or pictures of people wearing masks and saying, is that a good choice or a poor choice, right? Make it relevant to your students so they tie into it. This was just a PowerPoint that had some various different choices. And so what I like to do is I kind of like to do this as like a prior knowledge check or an entry slip, go through a few different examples of what are some good and poor choices. Let's just start thinking about what that means before we start to put feelings into some characters. So I would go through something like this. Again, whatever examples, if you want to use board maker symbols instead of just pictures, you can absolutely do that for your students who have AAC devices. You know that it's super easy to put an image from board maker into a PowerPoint, really easy. Definitely use what works for your students and the way that they're communicating best. And then I had something like this in a Jamboard where I just had I had a way for them to identify and actually record whether it was a good or a poor choice, right? So let's look at walking up the slide. Is that a good choice or a poor choice, right? And they would go through and they could either circle the smiley face or circle the frowning face. Obviously, going up the slide is a poor choice, so we would have them circle that. And then you can just add as many options as you want, right, for however many examples you want to go through. If you want every student to answer 1 or 2, you would just duplicate your slides, and then you can have your students record their answers instead of just giving you a thumbs up on the screen or a thumbs down. You can actually have some data, right? So then, we would go through our story and we would start working on identifying what the characters are doing, the actions they're taking, and then whether or not they're making good or poor choices. So I created a Padlet, and again, the reason why I like this is because it's a discussion board. It's something that's virtual that we often did in the classroom. We would have students participate and raise their hands, and now we can actually see it. So it's a visual discussion board, and I think it's really cool. It's a great way to incorporate technology into your classroom, and you can make this discussion board say anything, look however you want it to look, right? And you can include whatever prompts or supports you need. So I wrote down over here, making good choices. I have my little thumbs up to kind of give them a cue. And then I wrote, find a picture or write in 2 good choices we can make in school or at home in our community. Now you can also make this about characters, right? If you just read your story, you can say, find a picture, write in 2 good choices the characters made, right? And you can do that if you go into edit over here. We can very simply go find 2 good choices the characters in our story made, right? So you can just go in and save it like that. And then there you go, right? You have it ready to go for your story. And what the students can do is they can go down here, they can type in, and they have a bunch of different ways that they can respond. They can, well, attaching a link probably wouldn't really be super appropriate, but they can take a picture, right? They can record something. They could record their voice, right? They can draw something. So there's a bunch of different options for responses here. So it doesn't have to just be a typing response, which I really like about that. And you can, the pictures that are great, you can go on the internet, you can find different images, right? So there's a bunch of different ways that your students can respond and give you feedback. And I really like that about using a Padlet. It opens up the responses to many different various ways that your students might want to respond. Maybe your students really good at expressing themselves, but they have a hard time typing. So they can record their answer. You might have a really good writer, but they don't speak as well. So then you can have them type in, right? So whatever works, they can, like I said, they could draw, which is really cool. They could record their voice. They could record themselves speaking. So I think that that's a really awesome feature of Padlet. I like the collaborative nature of it, and I really like that it's a virtual way to have a discussion. And then I'm going to show you over here, there's a lot of really cool features within Padlet. So you can have other students like the post. You can turn that on or off if you want, absolutely. I try to do it in a way where it's supportive, so I wouldn't have a thumbs up or a thumbs down or rating them per se. So I have whether they would like it or not, right? So that's if they want. You could turn it off completely if that's better for your students. There's filters where you can approve it before it gets posted to make sure that they were on topic and that we're staying on track with what it is we're working on, right? If we're working on identifying things that the characters are doing, we're not going to go off topic and talk about what we want to eat for dinner, right? So you can definitely approve the posts before they go up there, and then you can filter profanity. Right, so you can go through, add those filters in. Another thing you can do is you can change the background. If something is too busy, you can make it basic. You do not have to add any sort of objects in the back or anything that might be too distracting for your students. And so what I did here was I talked about the good choices, and then I made another Padlet about the poor choices they might make, right? So what were some of the bad choices? What caused the problem in our story? And then they can go in and they can click again. They can add a bunch of different things. They can image search here, whatever that would be. And that's a really cool feature. Again, you might want to have your paras support your students in doing this. They can share what they want the para to find for them if maybe they can't access the computer as easily. But I find that it's a pretty easy way for our students to have discussions, see what other students are saying in a fun virtual way. So I hope you can use this. I hope this is a great pre-writing activity in a virtual manner that might actually support your students when they're going through and writing more of their opinions, and you're starting to get them to think about their opinions about a text and tying it into their own experience. So I hope you have fun with it, and I hope you can use Padlets.